Hey guys, tonight we're going somewhere strange. Not a battlefield, not a palace, but the moment humans first decided their own skin wasn't enough. Picture a fire burning low, the kind of orange light that makes your eyelids heavy before you've noticed it happening. There's a joke buried in tonight's topic too, because for a while, being naked wasn't a fashion choice. It was a survival strategy that stopped working. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight and what time it is where you are. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You are standing somewhere in East Africa, roughly 2 million years ago, and you have a problem none of your ancestors had. You are losing your fur. It happens slowly, over hundreds of thousands of years, so slowly that no single generation notices. But the outcome is strange when you look at it directly. Humans are one of the only mammals on Earth that ends up almost entirely hairless. Elephants keep patches. Whales keep a few bristles as pops. Humans lose nearly all of it, everywhere except the scalp, the underarms, and a few other places that seem to hang on out of habit. This fact alone sounds like a footnote. It isn't. Losing your fur changes almost everything about how your body works, and it forces a decision that no other primate on the planet has had to make. Here's the mainstream explanation, the one most anthropologists accept. Your ancestors were losing fur because they needed to stay cool. Running down prey across open savanna for hours at a time generates heat fast, and a body covered in thick hair traps that heat instead of releasing it. Bare skin, paired with millions of sweat glands, lets that heat escape. It is, essentially, biological air conditioning. You traded a coat for the ability to run all day under an unforgiving sun. That trade works beautifully during the day. It becomes a serious problem the moment the sun goes down. Without fur, your body loses heat quickly once the temperature drops. Savanna nights can swing more than 20 degrees Celsius colder than the daytime peak, and a hairless body has almost nothing to slow that heat loss. Your ancestors' cooling machines by day became vulnerable by night. Historians and anthropologists still debate exactly how early this cold exposure problem became severe enough to force a response, since evidence from that period is thin and scattered. But the pressure itself is not in question. Something had to change, or nights on the savanna would have quietly killed off the very adaptation that helped everyone survive the day. This is where the story usually skips ahead, straight to fur cloaks and animal skins draped over shoulders. But that jump erases a long, uncomfortable middle stretch. For a very long time, your ancestors had no good answer to the cold. They likely huddled together at night, clustering for warmth the way many social mammals still do. They stayed close to fire once fire was reliably controlled, sometime around 1 million years ago, though even that date is debated among researchers working from different sites. Fire helped. It didn't solve everything. Fire warms whatever faces it directly, but it does nothing for the side facing away, and it does nothing at all once you're a few feet from the flame. The quirky detail worth sitting with here is this. For a stretch of prehistory that likely lasted over 1,000,000 years, humans were the only hairless primate on Earth with no replacement for the fur they'd lost. Every other mammal around them, predator and prey alike, still had a built-in blanket. Your ancestors did not. They were, in a very literal sense, underdressed for their own planet, and they stayed that way for far longer than most people assume. Think about what that means practically. A cold night wasn't just uncomfortable. It was a slow drain on energy the body couldn't afford to lose, especially for infants, the elderly, or anyone already weakened by a bad hunt or a long illness. Hypothermia doesn't require freezing temperatures. It requires sustained heat loss with no way to stop it, and an open savanna at night. For a hairless primate with no coat provided exactly that. So the pressure builds, night after night, generation after generation. Somewhere in that pressure is the seed of the next stage. Because eventually, in a shift that changes the entire trajectory of the species, someone figures out that another animal's skin, if you can get it off cleanly and wrap it around your own, does the job your fur used to do. Nobody wrote that moment down. There was no one there to record it, and nothing about it left an obvious mark in the archaeological record right away. But biology has its own way of recording the past, tucked away in a place nobody expected to look. Not in bones, not in stone tools, in something much smaller, much stranger, and still alive on human bodies today. We'll get to that next. You are looking at something under a microscope that most people spend their whole lives trying to avoid. A single body louse, pale and small, clinging to a fiber. It looks unremarkable. It is, in fact, one of the strangest pieces of evidence in the entire story of human clothing. Here's how this works. Lice are not one single species that lives wherever it wants. Different lice specialize in different habitats on the human body, and they evolve separately depending on where they live. Head lice cling to hair on the scalp. Pubic lice, a separate species entirely, prefer coarser hair elsewhere on the body. And then there's body lice, which don't actually live on skin or hair at all. They live in clothing, laying their eggs in the seams and fibers of fabric, only visiting skin briefly to feed. That last detail is the key to the whole mystery. Body lice cannot survive without clothing. They need fabric to breed in, fabric to hide in, fabric to lay eggs in. No clothing, no body lice. It's that simple, which means that whenever body lice first evolved as a distinct species, separate from head lice, clothing must already have existed. The parasite is a fossil record for something that never fossilized. In the early 2000s, a team of researchers led by biologist Mark Stoneking set out to answer a question that sounds almost too strange to be real. Could you use the DNA of lice to figure out when humans started wearing clothes? The logic was sound, even if the method was unusual. If you could measure how long ago body lice split off genetically from head lice, you'd have a rough date for when clothing entered the picture, since that's the moment a new habitat opened up for lice to adapt into. The genetic analysis pointed to somewhere around 170,000 years ago, give or take a wide margin of error. Historians and geneticists still debate the exact number, since mutation rate calculations carry real uncertainty, and different studies have landed on slightly different windows. But the rough order of magnitude has held up across multiple independent research teams, which is rare enough in this kind of study to be worth noting. Sit with that number for a second, because it tells you something important about the story from Section 1. If clothing appeared around 170,000 years ago, but humans had been losing their body hair for possibly 1,000,000 years or more before that, there's a long, cold gap in between. A gap where your ancestors had no fur and no clothing, just fire, huddling, and whatever shelter a cave or a rock overhang could offer. That gap likely wasn't comfortable, and it's part of why some researchers now consider fire and social huddling not as background details, but as essential survival technology that kept the species alive long enough to eventually solve the clothing problem properly. The mildly quirky detail here, the kind of thing that tends to surprise people, is that lice weren't just passive evidence of clothing. In some ways, they were also independent proof that humans and their close evolutionary cousins interacted more than previously thought. Later genetic work on lice found signs of interbreeding between different human lineages, since lice can jump between hosts during close physical contact. A parasite built for finding new places to live turned out to be tracking, quietly and by accident, some of the more intimate parts of human history. Of course, lice evidence has limits. It can tell you roughly when clothing became common enough and worn consistently enough to give body lice a stable habitat to evolve into. It can't tell you what that clothing looked like, what it was made from, or how it was made. For that, you need a different kind of evidence entirely. Not something biological and invisible, but something physical, something you can hold. That's where the archaeological record picks up the thread, in tools that were shaped by hand, used against animal hides, and somehow survived long enough to still be sitting in the ground more than 100,000 years later. Stone scrapers with wear patterns that match hide working, not butchery. Bone tools shaped with a precision that suggests repetition, practice, and purpose. The lice told you clothing existed. The tools are about to tell you how it was made. You are holding, in your imagination, something small enough to fit in the palm of your hand. A flat, oval-shaped stone, one edge worn smooth and slightly rounded, the surface polished in a way that natural weathering doesn't produce. This is a hide scraper, and archaeologists have found thousands of them, scattered across sites in Africa and beyond, some dating back well over 100,000 years. Here's how you can tell a hide scraper apart from an ordinary broken rock. The wear pattern is distinct. Cutting meat leaves one kind of damage on a stone edge. Scraping fat and flesh off the inside of an animal's skin over and over leaves another. Researchers who study these tools under microscopes can identify the difference by the angle of wear, the polish left behind, and even microscopic residue that sometimes survives in the stone's pores. When a scraper shows the specific polish associated with hide working, that's not a guess. It's a measurable, repeatable signature. Turning a raw animal's skin into something wearable was not a quick job. First, you had to remove the flesh and fat clinging to the inside, which is where the scraper came in. Worked steadily across the surface until the hide was clean. Then the skin needed to be softened, since a dried, untreated hide turns stiff and cracks easily, useless as clothing. Early humans likely used a combination of methods here, including working the hide by hand, stretching it, and possibly treating it with fats or brain matter, a softening method still used by some traditional tanners today. Historians still debate exactly which softening techniques go back this far, since the materials involved don't preserve well. But the scrapers themselves confirm that some form of hide preparation was happening. Then came the part that turns a flat piece of skin into something you can actually wear. Sewing. The oldest known bone needles, with eyes narrow enough to have threaded something like sinew or plant fiber, date back roughly 40,000 to 60,000 years, found at sites across Siberia, Europe, and Africa. That's tens of thousands of years after the lice evidence suggests clothing already existed, which tells you something interesting. The earliest clothing probably wasn't sewn at all. It was likely simpler than that. Skins wrapped and tied, perhaps fastened with a bone pin or a strip of sinew, closer to a draped cloak than a fitted garment. Sewing, when it eventually appears, represents a genuine leap forward, since a sewn garment traps warmth far more effectively than a loosely wrapped one, with fewer gaps for cold air to slip through. The mildly quirky detail worth sitting with here is the needle itself. A bone needle, small enough to be easily lost, requires an eye drilled through solid bone using nothing but a hand-held stone point, turned patiently until it bores all the way through. Archaeologists have found needles so fine, with eyes so small, that some researchers believe the thread used with them must have been extremely delicate, likely twisted plant fiber or fine sinew, rather than anything thick or coarse. Making one of these needles by hand without metal tools could have taken hours. Losing one in the dirt of a campsite must have been a small, quiet frustration, repeated across tens of thousands of years and tens of thousands of campsites. Though, of course, no one ever complained about it in writing. Put the scrapers and the needles together, and you get a rough two-stage picture of how clothing developed. Stage 1. Simple draped skins, likely tied or pinned, appearing somewhere around 170,000 years ago based on the lice evidence. Built well enough to solve the cold problem, but not particularly refined. Stage 2. Fitted, sewn garments, appearing tens of thousands of years later, once needle technology caught up with the need. That second stage wasn't just about comfort. It was about precision, since a well-fitted, sewn garment holds in body heat far more efficiently than a draped one. And that difference in efficiency mattered enormously for what came next. Because around this same general window, something else was happening. Humans were beginning to move out of the warm, familiar climate that had shaped their bodies for hundreds of thousands of years, and into places far colder than anything their bare skin alone could have survived. You are walking north, and every few hundred kilometers, the world gets a little colder. This is the migration out of Africa, a slow, generational spread that eventually carried humans into Europe, across Asia, and eventually into environments that no hairless, sun-adapted body should have been able to handle on its own. Modern humans began leaving Africa in meaningful numbers somewhere between 70,000 and 100,000 years ago, with earlier, smaller movements possibly happening even before that. Historians and archaeologists still debate the exact timing and number of these migration waves, since the evidence comes from scattered sites and shifting genetic estimates. But the broad pattern is well established. Humans moved into colder, more variable climates far outside the range their bodies had originally evolved for. Here's why that migration only works with clothing already in the picture. A human body, stripped of fur and built for shedding heat rather than keeping it, is dangerously mismatched for a European winter. Without insulation, prolonged exposure to cold below roughly 10 degrees Celsius becomes a serious survival risk within hours, especially overnight. Neanderthals, who had lived in these colder regions for hungraphics of thousands of years before modern humans arrived, appear to have relied more heavily on other adaptations, including a stockier body shape suited to heat retention. Modern humans arriving from Africa didn't have that built-in advantage. What they had instead was technology. Clothing let a warm climate body survive in a cold climate world, essentially substituting culture for evolution and doing it far faster than natural selection ever could. This is where the two-stage clothing story from Section 3 becomes directly relevant. Simple draped skins might have been enough to survive a mild winter or a night on the savannah. They were not enough for the sustained, months-long cold of a European or Siberian winter. That kind of environment likely required fitted, layered, sewn clothing, the kind made possible by the bone needles that started appearing in the archaeological record around 40,000 to 60,000 years ago. It's not a coincidence that sewn clothing and deep cold climate migration show up in roughly the same window. One almost certainly enabled the other. The mildly quirky detail here involves what that clothing was likely made from. Sites in colder regions have turned up evidence suggesting early cold weather clothing wasn't limited to large game hides. Smaller, fur-bearing animals, including foxes, hares, and other creatures valued specifically for dense, warm fur, show unusual butchery patterns at some sites, patterns that don't match hunting for meat. Cut marks concentrated around the paws and skull, exactly where you'd remove a pelt cleanly while keeping the fur intact, suggest these animals were being trapped specifically for their fur rather than their meat. Somewhere in this period, early humans were apparently already thinking like fur trappers, selecting animals based on the quality of their coat rather than the size of the meal it provided. Layering likely mattered too. A single hide, however well prepared, has limits. Multiple layers trap air between them, and trapped air is an excellent insulator, which is part of why modern winter clothing still relies on the same basic principle. Researchers studying tool marks and clothing remnants at some cold climate sites believe early humans may have worn multiple layers, potentially including simple undergarments beneath outer hide layers, based on the range of hide thicknesses and preparation styles found together at single sites. This remains debated, since soft materials rarely survive tens of thousands of years intact, and much of this picture is reconstructed indirectly. What's not in question is the outcome. Clothing didn't just help humans survive colder places. It opened those places up entirely, turning regions that would otherwise have been unlivable into new territory. Without it, the human story stays confined to Africa and a handful of warm, temperate zones nearby. With it, humans spread into Siberia, into the Arctic Circle, eventually into environments so cold that survival without insulation would be measured in hours, not days. Clothing, in other words, didn't just keep humans warm. It functioned as a kind of portable climate, one your ancestors carried with them wherever they went, allowing a single, fairly fragile-bodied species to occupy nearly every environment on the planet within a remarkably short span of evolutionary time. But something shifts once clothing becomes reliable, once it stops being purely about survival and starts being available in more than one version, more than one style, more than one choice. That shift is quieter than the migration and slower, but it may be just as significant. You are draped in fur, standing at the edge of a small camp, and for the first time in this story, the fur you're wearing isn't just about surviving the night. It's about something else entirely. Once clothing becomes reliable, once it's no longer a constant emergency, but a settled part of daily life, something changes in how humans relate to it. This is well documented in the archaeological record from later periods, particularly the Upper Paleolithic, roughly 40,000 to 10,000 years ago. Sites from this era don't just contain plain, functional hides. They contain beads, deliberately pierced shells, ochre pigment residue on clothing fragments, and ivory ornaments designed to be sewn directly onto garments. Clothing had stopped being purely practical. It had started being decorated. Here's the mainstream explanation researchers give for that shift. Once basic survival is no longer a daily crisis, once clothing reliably keeps you warm night after night, there's room left over. Room for a garment to say something beyond, "This person is not currently freezing." Decorated clothing, ornamented hides, particular styles of wrapping or cutting a skin, all of it could signal something to other humans looking at you, which group you belonged to, what role you held, even, in some interpretations, your status or your skill as a hunter or a maker. This is where the story connects back to something from very early on. Losing body hair, all those hundreds of thousands of years ago, wasn't just a biological event. It stripped humans of the one visual signal every other mammal has built in, a coat that shows, at a glance, health, age, and species. Once fur was gone, humans needed a substitute, and clothing wound up filling more than one gap left behind. It solved the temperature problem, and it eventually solved the identity problem too, becoming the substitute coat that could say something no animal's actual fur ever could, since it could be changed, chosen, and passed down deliberately from one person to the next. The mildly quirky detail worth sitting with here involves ochre, the reddish pigment found smeared on some ancient clothing fragments and burial garments. Ochre shows up at human sites going back well over 100,000 years, often in contexts that have nothing to do with practical use. It doesn't tan a hide any better. It doesn't add warmth. Its main function, based on the context where it's found, appears to have been almost entirely visual. Somewhere in deep prehistory, humans were already treating a piece of clothing as something worth making look a certain way, not just function a certain way, which is a small but genuinely striking detail to sit with, since it means the instinct to dress deliberately, rather than just dress for warmth, goes back a great deal further than most people would guess. Historians and archaeologists still debate exactly how much of this early decoration was about group identity, personal status, ritual, and burial significance, or some mixture of all three, since the people who wore these garments left no written explanation behind. What survives is only the physical trace: pigment residue, deliberate ornament placement, patterns of wear that suggest particular garments were treated with more care than others. The meaning behind those choices is something researchers can only reconstruct carefully and partially from what managed to survive. What's clear is the broader arc. Clothing began as an answer to a cold night on the African savanna, invented by a species that had accidentally stripped away its own natural insulation. It became, through scrapers and needles and generations of quiet trial and error, sophisticated enough to carry humans into climates their bodies were never built for. And eventually, once the emergency had passed, it became something closer to what clothing still is today. Not just protection, but expression. Not just a barrier against the cold, but a way of being seen. It's a strange thought, turning it over one more time before the night takes over. The reason you might be lying under a blanket right now, warm enough to drift off, traces back through hundreds of thousands of years to a moment when your ancestors had no fur left and no answer yet for the cold. Somewhere between then and now, an animal skin became a tool became a garment, and a garment became something people chose, shaped, and wore on purpose. The itch that started it all was solved so thoroughly that most people alive today never think about it once. You probably won't either, most nights. You'll just reach for a blanket, the way your ancestors reached for a hide by firelight, and let the same old solution do the same old job it's been doing for a very long time. Somewhere in that quiet repetition, nothing much has changed at all.